Hui, ola kakayaka, everyone. Good morning to all you folks who come to join us with Rising Voices. I'm going to start off our morning prayer with a chant that calls in for the ancestral knowledge that is just beyond the veil, waiting for us to receive it. E hui mai keiki mai luna mai o nā mea una no iau e iau e hoi mai e hoi mai e hoi mai e hoi mai kaiki mai luna mai o nā mea una no iau o lahu e hoi mai e hoi mai e hoi mai e hoi mai kahiki mai luna mai o nā mea una no iau o nā poe e hoi mai e hoi mai e hoi mai. Again, that chant was to call upon the ancestors, our ancient ancestors from way back, where we all were really much family, to come forth to bring that knowledge that has been holding for us all these years, and it's just beyond the veil. Aloha and good morning to everybody. I guess it's off to you, Julie.
Thank you so much for that welcoming, Hank, and bring us all into this space together today. Providing that uplift to start the week off. Thank you. Huge thanks to everyone for being here. The virtual Rising Voices 8 panel session focused on health. Really focusing today on an issue that I think is very at the forefront of many, if not all, of our minds, and finding ways in this time to really to come together, as a community, as a family, and supporting each other and providing this good energy that I always feel fueled with when we come together in these ways. I really appreciate the broader community. And for everyone who's given of their time and energy in bringing together the group today, just hugely excited to have the opportunity and deep privilege to be learning from those who will be hearing from in just a few moments from the speakers, and a world of gratitude to Michelle Montgomery and Michael Chang for being our facilitators for today, and just always excited to come back together with voice. And so thank you, everyone. And with that, I will pass it off to you, Mike, to introduce everyone to the amazing folks we have with us today.
Oh, hello. Hello. Good morning or good afternoon to everyone, wherever you may be. Thank you, everyone, again for joining, and thank you, Hank and Julie, for kicking us off. I'll do a brief introduction for our wonderful 5 speakers today. I've known some of them for years, and some of them I've just met recently, and just reading through their bios and their experiences, it's just really humbling to be in this group of people and to hear from them and learn from them. And then I'll turn it over to Michelle to kind of cover the questions that we've asked our speakers to touch upon today. So our 5 speakers, so I'll just do their names, and I'll give a longer introduction before they speak. It'll be John Doyle, Valerie Segrest, Catalina Schaefer, David Rico, and Leslie Iawakea. And I'll turn it over to Michelle to give an overview of the various questions and topics that we've asked our speakers to speak to today.
Aloha Guado, everyone. Thank you for bringing your whole selves to share your hearts and spirits today, and good afternoon. So the questions, I'm going to read through the questions just so that we'll have a broad overview what the discussion topic will be about. We've also added the questions into the chat, and we'll re-add them again just so that they appear for everyone. So the first question that we're going to be discussing is, considering people's health, what climate-related changes are currently most impactful and important to you, your work, and your community? Question number 2, considering COVID-19 in particular, what particular challenges are you or your community experiencing? Are any of these challenges extended by or related to climate or other environmental factors or pre-existing situations? How do you see, and question number 3, how do you see Indigenous knowledges, sciences, and sovereignty responding to these changes? And the final question, question number 4, how do we bring our whole selves to this work? And how does that inform our collaborations in response to these changes?
Great. Thank you, Michelle, for reading those questions. So I'll introduce our very first speaker today, John Doyle. So John Doyle is a Crow tribal elder and a water quality director at the Little Bighorn College. And John today is calling in from Montana. So I'll turn it over to John. Thank you for joining.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for inviting me and to be a part of this discussion. And I'll start right out with the first question is considering our people's health. And for a number of years, I've worked on water quality, testing our water, and trying to ensure that our people have safe water. And right now, that is our #1 issue. Like so many other communities across the United States, there are homes with no water in it. Our water that's unsafe and it's used anyway because that is the only water source. Without water, and we've had where the whole system fails. And so Crow Agency is on surface water. It uses the Little Bighorn River for its source of water, and the Little Bighorn River also has contamination issues. So anytime those plants go down, And when they're brought back online, of course, there's a worry and a fear of contamination, and especially so this year. You know, it was always a problem before, but now we know that there's other ways that COVID can travel, and that will be through wastewater as well. And upstream from the town of Crow Agency is 2 other communities. And so we also know that that water moves down that river very quickly. And if our system fails at any point in there, then our whole system potentially could have problems, which is health problems for us. And, you know, that is the issue. That was number 1 question. And the number 2 question is considering COVID-19, what particular challenges is your community experiencing? I'll tell you right now that our community is experiencing extreme loss. And we're in a very economically depressed area. And what that means, like if you live in any one of our communities except for Lodgegrass, then if you need groceries or any kind of food item or anything that you need in your home, you either go out to Billings or Hardin or Sheridan, which means that you are traveling to a community much larger and much more chance of exposure. And so many of our homes are multi-generational homes, 10, 15 people in a home. And so combine that with the economy that we're experiencing right now, then the problems are really intense. And so that even as we sat here a while ago, I was listening to one of my coworkers talking about known exposures and how does that radiate back to us. That's a constant right now, that any little symptoms is an alert, you know, that somebody has contacted something. So there's fear in the community. You know, it's almost like every day there's a loss, there's a death. And it's not only the loss of that person that we're losing, but all of that knowledge and wisdom they carried with them and that friendship. And a lot of them are relatives. And so our communities are hurting right now. And so there's really not a lot that we don't really elaborate on it, because we're not wishing or calling anything bad to come towards us, because we're already dealing with it now. So the third question is, how do you see Indigenous knowledge? You know, that's always been a question to me when we say that word Indigenous knowledge. And I think it's more than that. It's how well we know, and are we conscious of the environment that we live in? Are we conscious of all that we live with? And it's not just us at the top of the pile and everything else depends on us. We are a part of all of that. And to me, that's Indigenous knowledge, is how we're connected, not only to each other, but to all of the things that we live with in our everyday life. The things that we don't even think of having significance are still connected to us in some way. And that Indigenous knowledge, if we would carry that and consciously practice it, maybe in a quicker turnaround for some of the issues that we're dealing with. And I know our issues are horrendous. You know, I keep track of that climate change impacts that are coming to us. For us, that means all of the other things that may be coming our way there. Then we have a river with warm water in it, and that was the case this summer. Our river was very shallow and the water was very warm. So how do we bring ourselves into this work? You know, every day we have to deal with the reality of how we're going to address those issues. And we have no economy. That is the flat facts right there. There is no economy here. If you don't work for a government agency such as BIA or Indian Health or there's Park Service and are the school districts, and there's no jobs. There's a tribal college, but for the most part, there are no jobs. And there's about 8,500 tribal members that live within the exterior boundaries of the reservation. And there's 14,000 tribal members, and we're scattered, across the state and across the United States. But there's about 8,500 people here that are in need, and also extreme health threats at this point. So all we can do is put our efforts into making something change. I don't feel like I need to leave here, that the challenges are here, that if we need to be here, this is where we're at, and let's fix it however that may be. And we might have to do things that are completely out of our normal way of thinking and doing, but if we don't do that, then our chances of recovery in not only COVID, but this climate change, then what? I have 14 grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and I see them often. They live with me. Many of them live with me. And I do not want to leave this world in a worse shape for them to try to figure out with no direction. And so it's up to us while we're here and able to do something to make a difference. So I'll stop there. Oh.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing your experience and your knowledge with us today. It's really appreciated, so thank you, John. So our second speaker today is Valerie Segrest. So Valerie is an enrolled member of the Muckleshoot Indian tribe and serves as and has dedicated her work in the field of nutrition and human health science towards the effort of the food sovereignty movement and catalyzing food security strategies rooted in education, awareness, and overcoming barriers to accessing traditional foods for tribal communities throughout North America. By utilizing a community-based participatory action research approach, she's worked to organize tribal community members and grassroots efforts towards strengthening sustainable food systems that are culturally relevant and nutritionally appropriate. Ms. Segrest earned her bachelor's degree in human nutrition and health sciences from Bastyr University and her Master of Arts degree in environment and community from Iawakea University. She's currently enrolled at the University of Washington in the PhD program at the College of Built Environment and Urban Planning. Over the years, she's earned several certifications in advanced herbal studies and has extensively researched the subject of historical and traditional food and medicine systems of the Coast Salish tribes of Western Washington. Her career began as faculty for Northwest Indian College and as a cooperative extension agent for the Traditional Foods and Medicines programs. She went on to found the Muckleshoot Food Sovereignty Project, a grassroots effort towards increasing access to traditional foods within the Muckleshoot community by identifying food resources, developing and implementing culturally appropriate curriculum focused on traditional ecological knowledge. And over the span of 10 years, Ms. Segrest has co-authored several publications, including the books Feeding the People, Feeding the Spirit, Revitalizing Northwest Coastal Indian Food Culture, and Feeding Seven Generations, a Salish cookbook. She was a Kellogg Food and Community Fellow at the Institute of Agriculture and Trade Policy, which afforded her the opportunity to share the efforts of the food sovereignty movement with audiences locally, nationally, and globally. Further, she made several important connections to the broader good food movement and key leaders in that arena. In 2019, she was featured in the Women's Day magazine, the Food Network magazine, and the J. Jill Inspired Women campaign. I also wanted to add a brief statement from Michelle Montgomery as well. And Michelle says, Valerie and I have known each other for a long time. She is an amazing Indigenous woman, mom, leader, activist, traditional educator, and someone I hold dear as family, as well as many members from her community. Valerie's community responsibilities and roles are numerous. So my ask and her willingness to share her knowledge today is definitely an honor. So thank you, Valerie, for being with us today, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you. And way to make me want to cry, Michelle. I really appreciate that. That's such an important piece of our work, is lifting each other up. And you always do that so well. I really appreciate that. So I'm just going to kind of go through the questions as well, just like Mr. John did. And I really appreciate everything you shared, John. It was beautiful and inspiring to me to hear. Currently, I work for the Native American Agriculture Fund as the Native Food and Knowledge Systems Director. And so part of what I want to share today is just some of what I'm watching unfold throughout Indian country during, this really crazy year we're having. But I kind of stepped out of working in my community work to understand more broadly what's happening across the nation, because the food sovereignty movement is alive and well and strong. And I feel like in the face of COVID and all the sort of cracks and gaps that it's illuminating in our food system, the way in which I've been able to witness people, I have over 27 grantees that I help sort of supervise and get through their grant projects, who have all had to pivot in this year, all their big plans. Part of our efforts are in person, their hands in the ground, their boots in the woods. People are like getting together and working together to help revitalize their food knowledge and inspire another generation to become advocates and agriculturalists and fishermen. And that has all been challenged this year. And initially technology was the answer, let's get on Zoom and let's do that. And I think everybody's kind of getting to a point partner is a tribal council member and has had to make really tough decisions around funerals and not allowing groups of people to gather and grieve, which is part of our process. And he, really sits and thinks about that a lot and feels guilty for it, but also ultimately knows that it's saving lives in a weird way. And so I'm sort of really concerned, with the first question about considering people's health. Not only has changing rain and snow patterns alternated the plant communities and life in the high mountain meadows, and increased the likelihood of wildfires in our community. I'm actually just south of Seattle, Washington, at the base of Mount Rainier. So we had those toxic levels of air quality for weeks this summer, right at the height of our huckleberry picking season, right when our deer season opened. And even now, several of our spaces that we would go to hunt and harvest are shut down because the roads are at an irreparable phase and unsafe for us to be on. And that has limited people's access now to the one thing that we were all looking forward to this fall, the being outdoors and, breathing and drinking that wild air. And that all sort of compounds on itself. And now we're all talking about how to support each other's mental health through this next season, because it takes a toll on you to not have your hands on those plants and organize your life, as you typically would around not just resources, but our relatives out there that are our greatest teachers, that are the curriculum written all across the landscape. So we're really trying to mobilize and push out some of our curriculums that I had written previously with my tribal school around social emotional learning and plants, native plants. I think this month's focus is on Western red cedar and generosity and abundance. So we'll be talking about that with our youth, but it's also spinning it off into a family curriculum set, so the whole family can talk about that together. And as we're all in a virtual learning environment, we're all learning about that plant together and boiling it to clean the air, and just sort of inviting it in our homes and asking for it to help us out in this really hard time. And that in the second question, in considering COVID-19 in particular, what particular challenges are you or your community experiencing? And the first thing I saw happen, which is, I think, worth bringing to people's attention, my whole work is around increasing access to foods and identifying challenges to accessing healthy and culturally relevant foods. And that was the first thing I saw happen. I have several grantees that are from the Dene communities and are from, you know, the whole peaks of the peninsula out here in Washington state, that are just typically what they call food insecure or food desert communities. And what we learned right away is that tribes are not actually written into the Emergency Food Assistance Program. So the USDA, the federal government, has a fiduciary obligation to provide food relief. Tribes are not written into that law. And what I saw happening was these great food donations being made or offered up to our communities, but the lack of infrastructure to be able to pick it up, store it, distribute it properly, or other large hunger organizations intercepting the food before it got to tribal communities. I was hearing stories from people from certain Navajo chapters that were traveling up to 4 hours to purchase food when they were told to shelter in place, just to get to the store and find bare shelves after the panic buying went through. So on the other side of that, though, the I guess more inspiring side, I don't want to jump to resiliency too soon, you know, because this is a struggle and it is a challenge, and it's never should America's first citizens be the last in line to receive emergency food assistance in the time of a pandemic. It is criminal. And it is our grassroots efforts and our people on the ground that strapped up their boots and took care of that problem, that were organizing, you know, interesting websites online where you could buy people's groceries and they would run back and forth and get them and make these deliveries happen to support folks who were also simultaneously furloughed from their jobs. Some of them, the only jobs that they have in their communities are on the governmental side of tribes. And so, you know, all this disruption's happening. And for me, the beauty of it, the remedy, and what helps me stand in my work every single day is being able to support folks who have been in this sort of marinating in this ecosystem and trying to build up food sovereignty for years, and know very well who to go to and what resources they can pull in to find solutions to help people in this time of need. And I think that, you know, that kind of brings me to, the third question about how do you see Indigenous knowledge, science, and sovereignty responding to these changes? And I guess as a person who has been in the field of health, and I work as a health practitioner unofficially in my community, I find that I'm not seeing enough encouragement around people taking care of themselves at this time, and not just waiting for a vaccination or something to happen, but to also be working on building our immune systems up as best as we possibly can. And we can do that by leaning into our traditional ecological knowledge, because that's the answer. The wisdom of that has sat in our lands for thousands of years. It's what upheld our ancestral health for thousands of years. And it's the answer is to, make sure you're building up your immune system. I like to think of it as our own internal Department of Defense. It is the interface between the environment and our internal world. And we need our troops to be strong. And that means, taking the time to manage your stress, number one, and because stress is the number one suppressant of our immune system, to eat well, to build your digestive fire, to pray, to meditate, to spend time with your family, to enjoy life. That's really the blessing of what's happening right now, is just to be in family and taking good care of yourself. And I think that our traditional ecological knowledge models that for us. And that's what helps me, I guess, stand in this work as my whole self. And I'd encourage all of you to do it too, is that we inspire one another, and self-care is important. Our traditional ecological knowledge is important, being a relentless advocate for this inheritance that's put before us every single day. This land, the climate change, all these issues, this is our living legacy is all contained in that. And so it is a reflection on who we are as a generation. And I've had several people tell me over the years, food sovereignty is never going to work. And I don't care if it works or not. I need to know that at the end of days, if I were standing at the precipice of the end of it all, that I looked back and said, I tried my hardest, because that's what my ancestors would have done. And that's the DNA that is inside of me. And so for me to stand in this whole work, I don't know if there's if I have any other option. This is what we're meant to do. This is what we were put here to do. And I like to think about that, and what's good for a Native person is actually good for everybody, right? You think about what's good for a Native student, it's good for all students. That was what one of my mentors, Will Bill, would say. So if we can take good care of ourselves and animate that for other people, I feel like we have the potential to save the entire world. No big deal, but also what a blessing, what a life to live. So I'm going to stop talking now, and I have to get off at 1:30. I'm sorry, everybody, but I'm looking forward to hearing the rest of the people speak. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Valerie. I got goosebumps at the end. If we're all in person together, you would be able to see it. So thank you. I'm going to transition us to our next speaker, who's Jackie Schaefer. So Jacqueline Catalina Schaefer is an Inupiaq from Kotzebue, Alaska. She studied interior design and sustainable building in London and the U.S. And she is currently a senior project manager for the Division of Environmental Health and Engineering at the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium. She's worked in comprehensive planning, energy, housing, and water/sanitation in rural communities across Alaska, utilizing a holistic approach to project development. Her passion has led her to infuse traditional Inuit knowledge into strategic planning to change the top-down approach into a locally driven grassroots approach. This innovative approach allows local leadership to be empowered to own and lead the discussions and decision-making. Her background in design and sustainable building science allows a perspective that places the end user at the center of change. Catalina believes her ancestors' traditional knowledge will help bridge gaps in our multicultural lifestyles and create balance in how we adapt to our rapidly changing climate. Her current work includes innovation sanitation solutions for unserved communities, tribal resiliency adaptation planning, and community engagement for community relocations due to climate impacts. Catalina also works with various Indigenous groups to revitalize the return of traditional practices, including the Inupiaq language, traditional healing treatments, medicinal plants, harvesting practices, storytelling, skin sewing skill sets, and dancing. Her commitment to serving the Indigenous people of Alaska allows her to utilize a variety of skills and talents. Catalina is a mother of 6 and grandmother of 7, and she currently resides in Palmer, Alaska. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah, it's always interesting to hear your bio because you think about all the, it just sounds so, I don't know, scripted, I guess. Catalina. I am a Inupiaq from Northwest Arctic. Grew up there, and I share this because I want to infuse it into the perspective of my response to the questions. I grew up without water and sanitation in a Inupiaq traditional lifestyle where we spent half our time in our community and then the other half of our time at our fish camp on the land and sea. And so my perspective is just that I still do that every year. This is the first year I was actually prohibited to fly up there and do and practice that. So I had to change where I fished and change where I harvested, but it didn't change the fact that I was on the land and sea. With the questions, I want you to just know that my perspective, just like yours, is unique. And it really does, just listening to John and Valerie, I feel like I'm in a place where I'm among mutual sister and brotherhood souls that obviously our ancestors placed us here in this moment in time to share. So I'm going to just go with the questions. The first question being, considering people's health and what climate-related changes are currently most impactful to me. The Arctic is warming 2 times faster than the rest of the planet. So you have to resonate that. And it impacts us in a way that ripples across the globe. So imagine an ice cube, and as it melts, everything that's in that space kind of disappears. So we have to keep that in mind. We have over 200 rural communities, over 229 federally recognized tribes, a couple that are different negotiated terms, but most are only accessible by air. Some are accessible in the summer by water. And the most impactful thing is our food and water security. So it totally resonates with both what John and Valerie said. The uniqueness of Alaska and our rural communities is that we still subsist off our land and sea. And so we don't have agriculture, but we still harvest annually, seasonally, from our land and water. And climate change and climate impacts are changing that. So it's making it more difficult. I have yet to lose anything in my lifetime that no longer grows due to climate impacts. And I'm always reminded that this 100-year sliver in time that the planet has become overpopulated and the resources have been extracted and earth and poked and prodded, that my ancestors in our region have been there for over 17,000 years, no different than yours in your particular region. So to me, that's a reminder to all of us that this sliver in time is an impact, but when you look over 17,000 years, it's just a sliver in time. There are stories, storytelling is our oral history, stories of summer weather year-round. So that means my ancestors somewhere back in time dealt with these kinds of extreme changes and they survived, and their traditional practices still survive today. So I'm inspired by that. And when it comes to COVID, because we're logistically challenged, because most of our communities you have to fly to, we have I guess you could see it 2 ways. One lens is that you have a control factor because you could test folks coming off an airplane and know who's contagious. but yet when you have small populations, it could rapidly spread. We too have housing issues where we have overcrowding and multi-generational homes, 10 to 20 people in one home. That's, Western design for a family of 5 or maybe, 3. And then we also have the history of the Spanish flu wiping out whole communities in rural Alaska. That was just enough generations ago where the elders in our communities remember, and they remember because they became orphans. And so that, that knowledge of protecting our people is at the forefront of our minds. And then something John said about the lack of gathering. We are very social. We gather for everything. We celebrate, we mourn, we honor our elders and youth. We have annual celebrations. We constantly share our food. And now that's been disrupted and in some cases completely ceases to exist. So it makes it very difficult because that not only affects your physical body, but it affects your spiritual body, and your overall health is affected because your mental health is challenged. And I would say that is probably one of the biggest challenges is how do we reach into our past to not make this mental health issue so hard. And I think there are answers there. COVID has really disrupted things and climate impacts. We already have communities that are being forced to relocate, and they've been under stress, major stress. Most of those communities lack water and sanitation. So here you have a community that has no water and sanitation. They're already stressed out for generations, maybe some of them 3 generations, thinking that they're gonna just get washed away to sea. And so now you have that anguish coupled with COVID, coupled with the loss of elders and all their knowledge, and you can't even honor them. So yeah, it's a little overwhelming for some communities. So how do we deal with that? The next question answers that. How do we see Indigenous knowledge, science, and sovereignty responding to these? In our case, we have that 17,000 years of ancestors guiding us. This isolation has provided communities to provide access to more land, air, and sea gathering. And so, because when you hunt and fish, you could do it alone or you could do it in your family bubble. And so what I'm seeing as a response to this is as COVID continued to drag on, we have more younger generations that are seeking that knowledge. They may have done it once or twice here and there, but not on a seasonal basis like the rest of us had. And so now I see this younger generation gathering and subsisting for the whole community. And that to me is a positive response. Our medicinal plants, when we have outbreaks, I'm seeing communities go and harvest our traditional medicines and use those to help people recover. I'm seeing people be more receptive to that. Valerie said, wait for the vaccination. We have thousands of years of medicinal history. Most Western medicines are based on something that came from our planet or foods, and those practices need to be revitalized. And to me, that is how we respond. We seek the knowledge of our ancestors and we teach others and we share. We have this platform called Zoom. So we share that knowledge. I have done so many Zoom conferences. And what I've realized is even in my lifetime, I share my knowledge with my family, my friends, and people that I interact with on a regular basis. Well, that went away. So now I've taken that knowledge and put it into different presentations to share with the world. And to me, that is something that Valerie said we could save the world. I think we can. I think we could share our knowledge and share with each other the importance of tribe, the importance of that responsibility to tribe, and use our foundational values as that conduit. And so I think all of this work, all that we do, and this collaboration of tribal interaction, whether you're in Hawaii or Montana or the Philippines or even in India, being reminded that as Indigenous people, we're strong and we've survived much. Our ancestors endured and prayed for us. And just like we prayed when we opened this conversation, we one day will be those ancestors. So we have to remember that this is a continuum in time, no different than a river flowing. And it's our turn right now to engage, inspire, share, connect with nature, and connect with our brothers and sisters of the earth, right? We have berry picking season just ended, and we wait till after the first frost for our cranberries that are low bush to the tundra, because it changes the texture and it makes them sweeter. And so I always say, when you go and pick that single berry, you're a living organism meeting another living organism, and you're connecting as energy. And we have to remember that that is healing to our physical body, our mental, our spiritual, and that holistic thought process and mindset changes how you react to crises. And to me, that is what we all need to do in order to survive this rapidly changing environment, whether it's infectious or climate. Yeah, so thanks.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that, Jackie. And yeah, I'm just feeling really moved by all of these different talks, and very humbled to be here with everyone. So thank you. So our next speaker is David Rico. So David Rico's pronouns are he, him, his, and he's a member of the Choctaw Nation through his mother, and Indigenous Mexican on his dad's side. Rico's Indigenous ancestors are native to the contemporary American South and northern Mexico. Thus, his blood is rooted on both sides of the newfound American border. He studied the history of science and public health at Yale University, and then graduated. Afterwards, he became a line cook for Jose Andres. For the past year, he's been working as an urban farmer for Sovereign Earthworks in Washington, D.C. So thank you, David, for joining us today, and I will hand it over to you.
Thank you so much. Hello, Iawakea, for everyone being here. Alito, it's nice to see everyone's faces to enter into this conversation space. And even today, I've heard music, I've heard the song of a shell, I've heard people talk with deep grace and love for the earth and for the future. And in these ways, this is also part of the work, interacting with futurisms outside of a dystopic mind, right back, having it's part of the process. I don't think I'm really going to address these questions in order, but I will try to touch upon them as I speak in different capacities. But the thing that really I find most compelling is the question number 4. How do we bring our whole selves to this work? And how does that inform our collaboration in response to these changes? Engaging with the whole self is something that I'm spending a lot of time working with. In my day-to-day existence, I'm working on urban farming on a project called it's called Sovereign Earthworks. And Sovereign Earthworks is a collaborative constellation of queer, trans, two-spirit, Black, Indigenous farmers of color. And we work with, right now we're in Washington, D.C., but hope with time to eventually find and steward over a 200-acre parcel of land, planting a food forest and offering housing and opportunities for the most marginalized folks in society. And our work, we tend with a lot of rare heirloom, indigenous, and African diasporic plants. And so I think the nature of our work is fairly good, right? To have our hands in the ground. And sorry, I got some. Can I speak up? I'm gonna speak at this volume. So post again if this volume doesn't. We can bring our own touch and our own life, energy entwined not only with one another but with the natural world again, right? As people, it wasn't until relatively recently that we lost touch with our agricultural and earth-bound ways. We are animals, after all. We were born of this earth. Everything that we're made of, everything that we form, everything that we influence, everything that we create, whether it be paper bags, plastic cups, whether it be remote controls or hot sauce bottles, all of the ingredients, all of the particulate and matter that came to create those things came from the earth, right? And so even being in DC, even being in a profoundly urban space, I am still surrounded by the product and by the embodiment of Mother Nature. And so part of the work is accepting that, is finding the divinity in all spaces of this planet and accepting that everything that we are is earthbound, and that if we destroy this planet and if we leave it in an unstable space for the next following generations, we will wipe out a lot of what it means to thrive and to exist. And for me, thriving is a separate space that I try to engage into. How do we, as populations that have experienced so much trauma, as people that have honored guns, really different situations of the apocalypse, how do we, in this new world, after exiting everything that we once were, how do we heal? How do we recognize the inherent trauma that's not only from our own lives, but from the lives of all of our ancestors? How do we, in the link of ancestral lineage, being in the middle of the preceding 7 generations and the following 8, how do we use our spot and our time on this earth to heal as much of that ancestral trauma as possible? How do we engage with ourselves with reverence and respect? How do we look at the land as a place that deserves hope, healing, and well-wishing? And how do we look at our bodies as the same thing? How do we extend positive associations with all these bodies of divinity, including our own? How do we engage with ourselves in sacred spaces as sacred beings? And these are, I mean, I guess kind of vague and ambiguous questions, but they all kind of revolve around the act of self-care and self-love, and the idea that you cannot engage in any really, well, it's irresponsible to engage in acts of change unless you are actively healing and holding yourself. We're really only able to give as much as we are able to hold, right? And if we're not giving ourselves healing, if we're not giving ourselves space to increase our own capacity, increase our own self routines, our own self-love routines, then we cannot then expend more energy than we don't have. So taking care of ourselves is something that I've heard several other participants speak to in this session. And a part of that is just recognizing that, like, COVID and climate change and capitalism and the contemporary workspace and the patriarchy and the structures that have been created by cis hetero these colonizing forces put us in a healthy state of normal. Our sense of normalcy and in engaging this work by getting a job, paying bills, making it from month to month is not aimed at our health as living creatures. And so we need to stop exiting this mindset that we're going to find our ultimate healthy bodies within these systems. And that we need to rise to the occasion to meet these challenges, these impending infections and this impending climate change by finding answers outside of contemporary American spaces and dive into Indigenous knowledge, Indigenous science, and sovereignty by asking for answers from the ancestors, by tending to ourselves, by asking for community and reclaiming relationship with the land. So I hope that all made some sort of sense. I feel like I spoke about a lot of random things, but thank you so much for this opportunity, and I'll pass the mic back on.
Thank you so much, David, for sharing. Again, it feels like many things you said resonated, but one in particular, I think you said we can only give so much as we're able to hold. And I think that feels like a very common theme that's emerged from all of our speakers. So thank you for sharing. So now I'll go to our last, but definitely not least speaker, Leslie Iawakea. So personally, Leslie was one of the very first people that I met at Rising Voices many years ago when it was hosted on the Big Island. And over the years, she's become a very dear friend of mine. And we've been able to stay connected through the annual Rising Voices workshops, as well as throughout the year in other capacities. So I'm really honored and humbled that Leslie is here today to share her experiences and her wisdom and her knowledge, because I know I've learned a lot from Leslie over the years. Leslie is a native Hawaiian Wahine from the island of Maui, Hawaii. She's been a consultant for sea level rise and relocation in Oceania for the past 10 years and has been a member of the Rising Voices for the past 8 years. And I think one of only a few of us that have been to every single Rising Voices as well, if I'm correct. So it is my pleasure and honor and privilege to introduce Leslie.
And kua and kupuna and hoaloha o Leslie Ko'inoa na Maui Maiao. Aloha mai kako, and hello everyone. I'm so humbled and honored to be on this panel, especially the four in front of me. I mahalo them for bringing the calm, the confidence, and the knowledge that comes with them. Your ancestry is seen through your words, and I just want to mahalo you for that. And then also having my BFF from Rising Voices, Michael, just seeing your face and hearing your voice, I send my aloha to you. But really, this is a family event. It's a once a month get together with people I love. And so I just want to say aloha to everyone. I'll go ahead and get started. I know a lot of you are so organized, and so I better hurry up and say what I have to say, and then we can have a discussion. So I'll just start from question one with considering the people's health, what climate-related changes are currently most impactful and important here in Hawaii for my community. And, you know, there's so many things going on, just like everyone else. And so I'll just go over a few. For instance, we have inundation and drainage problems here due to sea level rise, that the groundwater table leading to increased flooding and also been damaging our coral reefs with the temperature rising by several degrees. And there's an increase in ocean acidity that has threatened reefs and other marine ecosystems here. So just like the kalo, this affects our subsistence of eating fish, which makes us eat other foods that are not healthy for us. And so here we go, we're going to be overlapping each other's ike, each other's knowledge. I just heard that from David as well. It forces us into a state of eating food that is not conducive to our well-being. Also, the temperature here in Hawaii has increased by 1 degree Fahrenheit, and it's gotten hotter. It's obvious for many of us, and that affects also the trees and the plants up in the mountains. Certain plants that are becoming extinct here are native plants that are used for medicine. And so now you start to see a bigger picture of health, where it's not just the food, but it's also other dynamics that we tend to look at as being native. And finally, the one that I think I'm most affected by today is that there's shoreline loss here in Hawaii, which comes from, and it also includes large waves and hurricanes and tsunamis. We also have really high tides here. And after the full moon, that tide just gets so high that it goes over our roads and into our crops, into our ecosystem. And so I focus on shoreline erosion as part of my job here for the state. The sea level rise leads to change in coastal sediment transport, resulting in erosion beaches. And because of shoreline erosion, we now see our iwi kupuna, or our ancestral remains, coming up. The Hawaiian worldview believes the mana, or energy of that person, is still connected to the iwi, or bones. And last week on Oahu, we already had 12 cases of those ancestral remains coming up. As well as being on this call for the last hour, I've already received 3 new calls for iwi kupuna coming up today in the last hour. So this affects our health because it is affecting our spirituality, it's affecting our mental state, and seeing our ancestors coming up in a place that they were put to rest at. So as we all know, it's not just about the food that makes us healthy, but rather that ability to practice our traditions that lead to a healthy person. And that consists of many dynamics. And so we could be here all day talking about the health of our people. And what does that really mean? But these are just 4 aspects of that. And on a daily, right, we all deal with this on a daily basis. And so I mahalo all of you for having this discussion today because we're all dealing with it. So as you can see, Hawaii is not just seen through a tourist gaze, but rather a place that has history for the past 2,000 years. In my family, we can go back 68 generations and tell you who is in each generation. And so when we talk about the changes from climate change, we talk about our living ancestors, as well as our ancestors that are not here physically, but they are here spiritually. And so to get to question number 2, how did COVID-19, or how has it affected us? Well, if we don't already have a lot of concerns today, COVID-19 has just taken it out of the ballpark. The one thing that we are challenged with in Hawaii is the amount of people that can be together. Just like many of you, our nation, our lahui, we have huge families. Also, other Pacific Islander families come here from Micronesia due to the bombing. They come here to get their benefits. And so they are included in this statistic with Hawaiian people, that we just have a lot of people in our family. It's about community, it's about perpetuating, so it must be about having children. We do see 20 to 30 people in a household, and with COVID-19, the orders here were to have 10 people in the household, and then it went down to 5 people. So what do? Who goes where? Who has to leave the house? And these are important questions because it leads us back to health and welfare of our people. You know, just for instance, the beaches and parks are a place where a lot of oceanic Hawaiian or Pacific people venture to on a daily basis, because it connects to our gods. And so that is why we go there. And so when the beaches started opening again, the laws were to only have 2 people in your party, but leave the children at home. Or it then went down to 1 person in your party. So you can't go to the beach with anyone else. So these are things that are happening. What does this do for the family, for the community, when things that you have a space where you meet, now you can no longer meet there. So it shuts you off from your community. And really what we've noticed during COVID-19 is that it is business as usual for the government. And this pandemic just shined a spotlight on who the government marginalizes and oppresses here in Hawaii. The third question is, how do you see Indigenous knowledge, science, and sovereignty responding to these changes? I see Indigenous knowledge as a way to survive, because we are referring to our ancestral knowledge. It is seen through agriculture and food sustainability, amongst other things. There's stories that connect us to place and practices that are seen in the elements of reference, which are in the stars, the moon, and the sun, that allows for a native management plan that includes Indigenous knowledge. These ways of our ancestors were and still are resilient, and we can learn from their examples that are seen in stories and chants and songs, and combine with modern day approach to create new pathways and solutions for climate change and sustainability. Maybe not solutions for the next 100 years, but solutions for the time being. And you know, when I look at that question, I take a pause, because Indigenous knowledge is science, whether they or whoever wants to believe it or not. And the practice of it allows for sovereignty within ourselves. So it's important to have Indigenous knowledge and to focus and make it center in our universe. The fourth question is, how do you or we bring ourselves to this work, and how does that inform our collaborations? You know, I think John said this earlier. I don't think it's about how we bring ourselves to this work. It's rather about how our ancestors have brought us to this work. No one signs up for work like this. You suddenly find yourself it. It's if you have a passion for your ancestry, for your kupuna, for your elders, for your community. That's what brings you here. They have brought us here. And so it's a far greater discussion or story that we're really talking about. We're all in this together, you know, whether you're conscious of it or not, right? Even those that are not conscious of it, they're still in our lahui, our nation, our tribe. But Indigenous knowledge does inform our collaborations with others by having that native outlook of community. And in that space, we all collaborate to find solutions that are based on other worldviews. And that gives us the confidence to create new and modern pathways for solutions today. And so, you know, I haven't been to all Rising Voices. I think I missed one, the first one, Michael. And the one that I met Michael was the best one because it was in Hawaii, and we were able to show our elements of reference and how we look at them and how we connect them to climate change. And in that space, in my space, we see that the tribes and nations that came saw things similar, if not the same, and knew what we were talking about. And in that totality of that space, we realized we're all in this together, right? We all have the knowledge from our kupuna, and we're all coming together to find a way to move forward, you know, with collaboration, and how to be inclusive, how to communicate, how to have relationships. Here in Hawaii, we call it palina. How do we have relationships with each and every one respectfully, yeah, in our dialogue? And how do we then move it to the next level? And I think Rising Voices has done that. And I also hear that from the first 4 speakers, which I'm so appreciative to hear today. With that, I better stop. There's always more that we can always say. but I'd rather hear from each and every one of you. So I mahalo you for today, and I send my aloha.
Great. Thank you so much, Leslie. I love you. And I know you do. You know I love you. All right. Well, thank you again for all of our speakers. It's I'm just so astounded. I feel almost speechless, which I think almost never happens. So thank you all. I want to invite people to potentially ask questions in the chat. We do have some time left in our time together today, and maybe some time afterwards. I don't have anything scheduled after this, but I'm going to invite people to ask questions and invite Michelle to step in and help facilitate this Q&A portion. So thank you all, and thank you, Michelle.
So there's a Pilahak Wado, everyone, for bringing your whole selves and your heart knowledge to this panel. It's always an honor to see so many ancestral voices being shared through our generations, because knowledge is all about our genealogy. So a question we have here from Sarah Green: in considering compassion and enabling of students during a pandemic at our institution, which is Northwest Indian College, alumni elder Uncle Tim Ballou asked us to consider what cultural practices of isolation can we reflect on. And this is open up to any of the panelists that would like to respond.
I'm sorry, Michelle. Can you repeat that question? Sorry.
Most definitely. I'm sorry if I'm not speaking clearly enough, so I apologize. This question is from Sierra Green. And she's called, the question is from Nimipu country, Nez Perce area. In considering compassion and enabling of students during a pandemic at our institution, the institution would be Northwest Indian College, Nez Perce campus, and also the Lummi campus. Alumni elder Uncle Tim Ballou asked us to consider what cultural practices of isolation can we reflect on.
I think, and maybe I'm off the point, but you're asking for what practices of isolation. For me, my work in my PhD, my fieldwork was in voyaging practices. And so in saying that, my work is also on Kaho'olawe at a navigational platform where I sit at the navigator's chair and look at the stars at night, and also connecting mo'olelo or stories, genealogy, cosmology to it. And so it's really diving into the Hawaiian worldview, which really gives me the confidence to then go back to my campus and face whatever I have to face there. But in that space, I'm able to look at the stars or look at the sun rising and understand that there's stories that I can refer back to without someone looking at me and saying, oh, you're American now, come on. You know, the Hawaiian, your queen was overthrown. And I mean, I get this all the time. So, you know, you still want to be a Hawaiian, you still want to look at that. But what really happens is when you do things and you look at intangible culture, you can sit there without letting people know what you're doing. And to me, that is the best way to talk with my ancestors, understand their traditions, just be that Hawaiian that no one else is criticizing at that moment. I mean, I hope that answers that question. There's a space and there's a time, and sometimes we don't have to be talking about what we're thinking. We can just be there and focusing on what is. Mahalo.
Would anyone else like to respond to the question?
Yeah, I might try to take a little crack at it. Yeah, practices of isolation. I think for me, one of the things I've been interested in is trying to reconnect with childhood. What are the things that I did when I was like very young to entertain myself, and deeply investigating in the awkward and the silly, right? We have this society that really differentiates your life from childhood to teenage adolescence to middle age to elders, and in all the ways that those delineations are important and useful, we also have to understand that there is some amount of joy that can be obtained from just like sitting with yourself, trying to come up with jokes, trying to doodle some drawing, making music, um, learning about things like cooking, learn about the architecture of different fruits and vegetables so you can cook them more effectively when you make your next dish. Do some silly dancing, write somebody a letter. Um, do things, I think, also like in ways we're solitary creatures, we should find ways to combat boredom and invest in ourselves. And in ways that we're social creatures, we should find ways that we can authentically invest in others. And what that can look like is even just texting 2 or 3 people that you care about every day. It can look like writing a letter on pen and ink. It can look like giving people cards and gifts out of the blue. And even though that we're distanced physically, that doesn't mean that we can't still invest in others. If you learn a nice little dance that you really enjoy, you can put it on a live stream or invest in the silly and the awkward.
I love that, invest in the silly and the awkward. It is a common practice by myself in isolation. So thank you. I like to say Wado Pilahak for everyone for joining. I'm deeply, deeply honored with much gratitude to our presenters for sharing your hearts and your knowledge with us today. And we'll pass it on to Julie. We're about time.
Thank you so much to Michelle and Mike and everyone who shared so much of themselves, of where they're coming from, of how they came into this in a multitude of ways. And I think really importantly, especially in today, really focusing on the care that we need to be giving to ourselves and to each other, and how to continue to lift each other up. And really, really grateful to everyone for this conversation. We hope that you all will join us in a couple of weeks on Friday, October 30th at 12 p.m. Mountain Time, where we'll be having the Rising Voices 8 Health Working Group session. And so this is kind of building up to this, and hopefully this is a platform to really engage in an interactive conversation all together on the 30th. So please, in the meantime, take care of yourselves, take care of each other. And with that, I will hand it over to Hank. Thank you so much, everybody.
Hey, aloha, everybody. Thank you for allowing us all to participate. These meetings are so good. Anyway, I believe this is the ending. So I wanted to just share. I wanted to share with you the trail of the water in Hawaiian, and it recognizes our 4 gods. Anyway, it goes, "Hey tu, ate ate tai o tu. Oh ocean God, you give us life and you take it away. E tanaloa, lao vili ito. Oh sun God, heat the waters of the ocean that it may rise into the heavens. He lono he ulu te me ai o te poe noa. Lono, you are in charge of the staff of life for all living things on earth. How he accomplishes that, he calls upon Kani. He says, Eitani, Eitani, ta hitavaita tuivi, e luli luli tapoatu, a teata taiotu. Or, oh God, Kani, please release the waters of the heavens that it may land on the mountaintops. And as the water finds its way back down to the ocean, it'll feed all those things that are put into the ground to sustain life. And with that, I thank you all again. I'm going to blow one more poo, and I guess we're pow. Hello, Mike.
Alarm bell rings, same thing every day. Bell answer the phone, I'm not home, I'm already on my way. Out the door, down the street, got to keep me on my feet. I got coffee, I got donuts, in the office down the street. And the fat hat lady's faking a heart attack. And my manager yelling at me, say, can't give her money back. Bank called, the notice overdue. And that's just one more thing I gotta do. Till I get off the earth. Till I get off the earth. 12 o'clock, the lunch bell rings. Same thing every day. You better answer the phone in the proper tone. Yes, sir, whatever you say. Right on time, on the time. Got to keep me on my feet. I got contracts, I got lawyers. In the office, down the street. Bank jam is backing up. Holding out can stand. Things ain't working out the way I had them planned. Bank called the meeting, just a drink or two. That's just one more thing I gotta do. Till I get off the earth. 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 6 o'clock, it's the happy hour. Sipping on the whiskey sour. Bartender asking about a refill, and I'm wondering who's paying the bill. The ladies be heating the call, sugar papers, one and all. My boss be dancing on the dance floor, so I'm heading out that door. And I'm making my move, I'm breaking out this bar. And I'm getting my groove on. I'm driving home in my car, and the blue light comes flashing into view. And it's just one more thing I gotta do. I get off the earth.